Today's video is going to be a little different. We're going to focus on just technical information regarding some of the historical changes that were made to Stihl chains. All these are going to be based off technical information bulletins that Stihl produce for themselves. So the first one we're going to look at here is a technical information bulletin marked 4195. I believe this is from 1995. That is the dates at the bottom. However, there will be differences. So this is from October 11th, 1995. There will be differences because some of these were issued in different countries. So there may be differences between the dates mentioned and what occurred. So what this bulletin deals with is Stihl's changes in recommendations to files, sharpening angles. If you're familiar with some of the older information out there, hopefully I can put up an older chart. There was different filing angles recommended for different chains. There may have been a 30 or a 35 degree top plate angle. Files may have had tilt, other chains did not. In the past, when I tried to find information regarding this, the general information I received was that the changes were made for simplification. They wanted a more simplified guide or recommendations to be able to give to people. With access to the technical bulletins, we can see that. So we'll go through what the changes were that occurred. So these changes were made in 1995. So if we look through it, we've got our sharpening instructions, sharpening tools and gauges for Stihl oil-o-matic chains. The contents list what they dealt with in this bulletin. So filing angle standardization. This is when everything moved to that recommended 30 degree filing angle. The sharpening instructions that they're modified to suit. Section 3 deals with the changes to the filing tools or aids, so your file holders and guides, etc. They changed from the older setup to what we regard now as the current. They also changed the recommendations for the HOS or the USG grinders. These have been changed multiple times since. That whole charting system's a bit of a mess in my mind, but whatever. So the first change was the filing angle. In future, Stihl oil-o-matic chains of all types and pitches, with the exception of square ground and carbide tip chains, will be sharpened to a standard filing angle of 30 degrees. Special sharpening instructions apply for square ground on carbide chains. The sharpening instructions in owner's manuals and the instructions for mechanical sharpening aids and electric sharpeners will be changed accordingly. So this is when everything changed to that 30 degree angle. We went from previous recommendations to that 30 and hold it flat. We also picked up the new style tools at this stage. Here is an example of the older style file holder down below, which we'll show in a minute. So as you can see, they've just moved to this simplified sharpening instructions. During manual resharpening with the file holder, the file must be held horizontally and parallel to the 30 degree markings. On the filing tools, the frame is set to 30 degrees horizontal and 0 degrees vertical in all cases. So this would have applied to things like the FG1 and the FG2, those file guides, or FG3, sorry. The manual file holders, even their recommendations for if you're just using a file, this is where it changed to 30 and flat. If we move down here onto the second page, we can see they've given an example of the correct side plate angle that would form. Now there are differences. This is from 1995, so they're still recommending some of the older angles. So this is where they're telling us that if you're using the correct file position or correct sharpener settings, you'll obtain the following angles. Rapid Standard is the older chipper style chain. It is mostly dropped from the range and only appears to be available in 404 and only available in selective countries. Your Rapid Micro and your Pico Micro, so these are your semi chisels, either your normal size semi or your 3/8 Low Pro semis. They were recommending an 85 degree side plate angle. I'll go through in some of the later technical bulletins to explain the change there. And your Rapid Super at this stage, they were recommending 60. There is a later technical bulletin that sort of contradicts what's said here. The actual factory sharpening angle, as best I can tell at this point in time, was still 70 degrees. As we move down into our sharpening tools, you can see this is where the changes were. So before this period in 1995, the file guides were actually divided by chain type. So this file holder that they recommended here was for Rapid Standard, so our chipper, and our Rapid Micro. And it would be applicable with a 4.8mm file or 3/16 file to all these sizes. You could use it for 325, 38, and 404 in your Rapid Micro. My understanding is the full chisel version, whilst being a slightly different guide, was the same. You would use that same size file for the 325, 38, and 404. I have followed the older recommendations a few times now with 404 chain, and it can do a reasonable job. But this is a point where we transitioned into the recommended file holders, file sizes, and tools that we use today. So a Stihl 3/8 uses a 1364, or that 5.2mm file. We use a 3/16 on 325 and our 7/32 or 5.5 on our 404. But this is a point in time where it transitioned into this change. We've got bits here just mentioning the supply, how it's going to change over time. They're basically going to sell out their older stock and then carry on. Now, obviously, because of those changes in those file holders and recommendations, they'd moved to new sharpening kits. So from this point forward, from 1995 forwards, you went to having file kits for specific chain sizes. Before that, it was really between chain types. You'd have a semi and a full chisel file guide. This is where we get into our recommendations of what they carry forward with the file sizes and the new holders. Different part numbers for the kits as we go on. In the bottom here, we've got the changes in the recommendations for the USG or HOS grinders. This is where they move to a more standardized setting for all the chains where possible. And that's the complete chart of this era. So that's the changes that were applied to this tech bulletin. We'll open up a few others and have a bit of a look. So this is a later tech bulletin from 1999, and this deals with the change in the geometry of the factory RS chains, so Rapid Supers. So we can see here it deals with the 33, 35, and 36, so your 50, your 58, and your 63 gauge 3/8, your RSF, which was a skip, a 50 gauge skip, your RSK, and both your RSKs are classics. They will be supplied with optimized cutter geometry in the future. The change greatly improves out-of-the-box sharpness of these chains in comparison with the previous grinding geometry. So as we can see here, they've changed it from the 70 to the 60 degree side plate angle. They list it as an increase in cutting efficiency of 16% and the required feed force is reduced by 23. If you've ever played with different side plate angles, you'll know as you start working it back, so as you change that angle from say 60 to 80, there is a reduction in the chain's ability to self-feed. It requires more effort on your behalf. The trade-off to that is it's more durable. You're trying to balance those numbers. This change was made, I suspect, when improvements had been made to the design of the lower part of the cutter, especially regarding the heel and the clearance in the rear. I believe this occurred due to that ability to reduce the vibration that the operator felt. They felt confident that they could increase that angle at this stage and increase that initial cut speed. Some of the more technical documents that I may include during this go into some of the details of the different cutter design and the improvements that were made. Have quite a few relating to the period when the C or the Comfort series chains were introduced, and it explains some of the improvements made to increase operator fit. So in those sharpening instructions, we saw that the RM chain still had an 85 degree recommended side plate angle. This is a technical bulletin from 1995 regarding changes to the RM chain. The RM, the semi-chisel, had a lot of big improvements throughout its life. This is obviously relating to one of them. So new cutter geometry, similar to Rapid Super. So they actually changed the overall size and design of it. They changed the tie strap to match the modified cutter. There on the RM2 chains, it would have a kickback reducing feature. drive link geometry, and etc. But what we'll just focus on, so the basics is it become taller, become 0.5 millimeter taller, it increased the top plate clearance angle, so on and so forth. We'll just look at the drawings. It gives everyone a better idea. So the old cutter is made up of that broken line, and the new one is a solid line. So as we can see, they've tilted it further forward. They've reduced that rearward slope. They've changed the top plate clearance angle. They've made the leading edge closer. They've increased that height there. They've completely redesigned the shape of the depth gauge. So they've moved it further forwards to account for the initial part of the corner being further forward. And they've raised it up to help match that height of the cutter. If we look over here, you can see where they've changed the geometry. They're making that kick out, that initial kick out, occur much later. Reduced it there. They've also increased some of the clearance underneath through the chip channel there, shooting out through the back to try and improve clearance. These are all changes that have been made to reduce that friction on the sidewall there, the side of the kerf, as well as improve some of the flow underneath. We can also see from the front, this was the point in time that they moved the RM cutter across to the bent over or the kicked over depth gauges. So when you view them from the front, they kick over to the side. That is generally done to improve the cutter's stability in the cut. It stops them trying to pull as far outwards away into the sidewall of the kerf. Generally decreases vibration a bit and helps them track a bit better. Changes were also made. We can see it looking from the inside, but this is demonstrating the difference in the humped drive link on the RM2 chain. But if we look at it from the inside, we can also see those changes where we've got the taller cutter depth gauge and the different spacing. They mentioned down the bottom, the increased cutter height and wider top plate rake result in a noticeable improvement in cutting characteristics. The offset depth gauge helps enhance straight line control of the chain, which provides a smoother cut and helps minimize vibrations. This is obviously some of their selling points: higher cutting performance, reduced feed effort, improved cutting convenience and comfort. They also made changes to the geometry of the lower section of the drive link. So the flank angle of the drive link was changed from 90 degrees, where they had 40 and 50 on the other side, as we can see in this little drawing over here, to being 40-40. This helps improve the reliability of the chains when cutting hardwood operating in extremely low temperatures. So the modifications occur over here to the shape of the lower part of the drive tang before it come up higher and then come across. Now there is a bit more meat in it down through this lower section. Any of the guys that have run big saws in a lot of very hard cutting conditions, you'll know that that is a particular weak spot. Most of the damage you see commonly occurs due to worn out drive sprockets, people that haven't replaced them. However, even with a good drive sprocket in extremely hard conditions, you start wearing the lower section. Something you don't really see recommended as much anymore, but used to be in the past, is something that people in those harder cutting conditions should seriously consider, is reshaping this lower section. You get in there with a round file and you reshape it. This little point down the bottom here, which I can't really point out that well. Unfortunately, I can't mark this one up, but there's very lower point here. It's important to actually keep a point there. If you start having issues with chips clogging your bar rails, it is good to have a look at the underside of here. As long as there's an adequate amount of depth in the rail, you want a little point on there to keep sweeping all that crap out of the groove. It will settle in the very bottom where this can't reach, but having that correctly shaped front can help sweep it all out. The rest of the information is just relating to the service parts, the changes in it. Obviously, there would be no interchangeability, so if you had an old loop of RM, you wouldn't want to put the new cutters in there or anything like that. Now we're moving on to another section from 97. So this is another change to the RM, so a couple of years later. This one we were just dealing with was in 1995. There was one that preceded it in 92 that I do not believe I have. However, in 1997 there were some minor changes made again to improve its cutting behavior. Whatever the changes were here were very minimal, clearly. They're saying designs to improve cutting performance and the chain service life, less sensitive to sharpening errors, more accurate straight line cutting. But the important thing is, they say at the bottom, the dimensional change to the modified saw chain is not visible to the naked eye. The new chain can be identified by a code stamped on the straps, the first optimized saw chain to be shipped with code X4. Important thing to remember there, all these chains do have codes listed on those tie straps. It won't be on every strap, but it is on a few. Briefly looking at some of the ones I've got around me, some are Y2, I've got a W6, there's all different stamps. I believe them to just be a date code or a batch code, something to help identify when they were made. While we're talking changes to different chains, this is obviously much later, 2010. This is some further improvements to RM chains, but specifically focusing on the 404. What you will notice from different markets is different names for chains. So this is called the new half chisel chain. So semi-chisels sometimes get called semi-square, half chisels, all sorts of things. In this document, they've referred to them as a new half chisel chain. This is an interesting one. I do believe I can show both of these physically. I might follow this up later because I believe I have RMF both before and after these changes were made. So these changes, they're talking about improved vibration, reduced tendency to chatter. So the changes that occurred here are pretty basic. They've changed the shape of the depth gauge. They've moved to that canted over one. I believe there's some changes in the lower part of the heel too. I will have to have a look. Other interesting thing at this era, most of the chains of this era had C for the comfort, because that was a big change that occurred in the years previous to this. These do not. The 404s do not. They do not have C. It's the cutters and tie straps are not undercut on the rear portion of the running surface. That is different. The updated saw chain is characterized by an offset and forward depth gauge. So that's a feature that it doesn't exist in the 404 chains, but does in others. At this stage, everything remained the same. They didn't change anything, recommendations to the sharpening angles or anything like that. They give you service notes for your different breakers and bits and pieces and your new kits. This is going to be one from 1996. This is the Stihl Oil-O-Matic chain lubrication system with new oil reservoir. So this is a change to the Oil-O-Matic system. This is actually where we picked up the little hole in the drive links. So some Stihl Oil-O-Matic chains now feature an oil reservoir in addition to the familiar oil channels. The reservoir takes the form of a computer-designed bore in each drive link. It helps improve chain lubrication, particularly at the bar nose and on the underside of the bar. The further development Stihl Oil-O-Matic system, oil channel and oil reservoir, has since been patented for Stihl. So this is the first occurrence where we actually get the holes in the drive link. Before that, we just had the channel. Some of the chains, the RSKs, just have the channel and the hole. Most of the RS and RM also have the little dimples in the drive link. So yeah, that was a pretty important change to things. So it mentions here the Oil-O-Matic reservoir functions in 3 phases. Phase 1, filling the reservoir. When the drive links of the rotating chain pass the E-matic ramp and the oil inlet hole, the oil channel scoops up a fresh load of oil and initially fills the oil reservoir. The oil is then distributed as before to the bar chain and rails. So the hope there with that little hole is it just fills with oil and it will help carry it further. The channels are actually there to try and drive the lubrication up into the rivets. So the second phase is transportation of the oil. The oil in the drive link reservoir is trapped by the bar grooves and rails. Inertia prevents the stored oil from flowing back into the Oil-O-Matic channels while the saw chain is running. Stored oil is thus transported along the bar. Then the way it's distributed out through the nose. This is where we start losing it as it goes around. The centrifugal force occurs at the bar nose, causes the oil reservoir to flow into the channels. So yeah, this is where we lose it. Start losing all that oil out in that nose. Helps lubricate everything out through there. They list all the benefits. With durabatic bars, the additional lubrication helps reduce friction between the chain and the guide nose. Guide bar nose. So the first chains to feature it when it first came out were the 325s. You got your RM, your RS, and your Rapid Micro 2. The 3.8 Rapid with 63 gauge links, and the 3.8 Pico, your 3.8 Low Pros, will be modified at a later date. There are currently no plans to incorporate the oil reservoir into 4H4 chains or 325 and 3.8 chains with drive link gauges of 50 or 58 gauge. So there you go, that's the beginning of some of that. Well, not the beginning, but it is a phase of that. We'll deal with this one lastly. There is multiple others of these. We'll probably try and do videos about them, just so we've got a more concise source of all the information. This one's a little odd in the change that occurs. It goes what most people would consider to be backwards. But in 2002, we get a change, and it's only related to the square change, your RSLs and your RSLFs. In the future, the previous square ground saw chains with Rapid Super cutters will be replaced with versions of the Rapid Super Classic. The Rapid Super Classic cutter has consistent performance as the cutter tooth is filed back. Now, I cannot find any actual information on why this change occurred. That's all they give us. But if we look here, the top is what it was, and the bottom is when it moved to the classic style cutter. The change that occurs is to do with the depth gauge. The new Rapid Super Classic cutter with slim profile depth gauge. This upper one, which they describe as a forward projecting depth gauge, is the same one used on just about everything. They have that forward facing hump. The reason that's there is part of a kickback reducing feature. It is there to try and prevent things getting caught up on that front edge. You hear a lot of people talk about safety chain and you wouldn't use it or this, that and the other. Just about every modern chain has a safety feature of some description. It's not enough for them to get a kickback reducing rating, especially given the rating system is quite all over the place and not really applicable to a lot of applications, and it's probably nowhere where you would actually use this chain. But yeah, they've gone backwards. They went back to the old cutter, and I haven't been able to find any reason as to why. All the RSLF I have is on the older style cutter. I thought I may have had some on this forward projecting type, but I do not. I'm not sure if modern ones have changed, but all the stuff I've been able to get is based on the old classic cutter. Anyway, I'll probably wrap this up now. There is a bunch more technical bulletins. If anyone else has more of these, I would be very fascinated to try and get hold of them. I believe they're still listing a lot of the historic ones on iAcademy. If someone has access to that and are able to get any of the ones relating to chains earlier on, I'd love to see them. I just find this stuff fascinating, the changes that occurred over the time. So this is only related, obviously, to Stihl products. I don't have access to any other manufacturers like this. I have got recently a lot of literature referring to older McCulloch recommendations, which is something I will probably go through just to base all that information to try and make it easier for other people to find in the future if anyone else is interested in this kind of stuff. But yeah, we'll leave it at that one for today, and yeah, hopefully we all learned something.